of the entire world. Sounds like a lot, right? Maybe even impossible. But hey, that's exactly what we're going to try and do. And to get our bearings in this massive story, we're going to start with three simple and kind of strange questions. First off, what is our modern alphabet doing on an ancient lice comb? I mean, seriously, it's such a bizarre place for one of the greatest inventions ever to just show up. We're going to find out why. Next up, how on earth did a Greek scholar, all the way back in ancient Egypt, manage to measure the entire planet over 2,000 years ago? We're talking no satellites, no computers, just shadows and some seriously clever math. And for our final and, yeah, a much darker question. We all know the horrors of the 20th century, but who out there in all of history actually killed more people than Adolf Hitler? The answer probably isn't who you think. So let's keep these three questions in mind as we rewind the clock all the way to the dawn of civilization.
Okay, so our story kicks off in Mesopotamia. You know, that famous land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is where the Sumerians built the very first cities, they invented the wheel, and hey, they even gave us the 60-second minute. They basically created a whole new way to live. But with a new way of life comes new kinds of conflict.
See, at first, all these new cities were basically independent little kingdoms. That is until this one king, Sargon of Akkad, came along with a very, let's call it a direct approach to running things. He was pretty clear about his philosophy. He wasn't there for the people. Nope. He was all about pride, power, and possessions. And by conquering all his neighbors, he came up with a brand new political invention, the empire.
But here's the thing, Sargon's empire wasn't the only show in town. It's so easy to think history just happens in one spot at a time, but that's not how it works. While Sargon was busy building his empire, you had the Egyptians building the pyramids. Over in Crete, the Minoans were creating this incredible art. And in what's now Pakistan, the Indus Valley civilization was building these stunningly well-organized cities. The world was already a busy place.
Now, all these amazing civilizations needed a way to keep track of things, right? And early writing was, well, it was complicated. You had a different symbol for every single word. Then, somebody had a truly revolutionary idea, the alphabet. Instead of a symbol for a whole word, why not a symbol for a sound? You just combine a few dozen of those sounds and suddenly you can write literally anything. It was simple, it was elegant, and oh boy, was it going to change the world. And that brings us right back to our first mystery. So, where was the earliest known alphabetical sentence ever found? You guessed it, right here on this 3,500-year-old lice comb. And the inscription? It's just a simple, super relatable plea, may this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard. So you go from a totally mundane, everyday problem to the foundation of all global literature. Now that's the power of the alphabet. This amazing new technology of writing really helped kick off the next great era of human history, the classical age. Over in Greece, you've got thinkers starting to ask these huge, fundamental questions about the world. Meanwhile, in Italy, a new power is building an army that's about to conquer it all. These are, without a doubt, the foundations of the modern West. And in Athens, you see this incredible chain of knowledge being forged. First, you have the philosopher Socrates, the guy who questioned absolutely everything, and he taught Plato. Plato then goes on to found a school and teaches Aristotle, who is just one of the greatest minds in history. And who did Aristotle get to tutor? A young prince who would become Alexander the Great. Alexander goes on to build this massive empire, but the second he dies, it just crumbles. His generals start fighting over all the pieces, but here's the upside. All that chaos spread Greek culture and knowledge all across the Middle East. And it was right in the heart of this new Greek-influenced Egypt, at the Great Library of Alexandria, that the scholar Eratosthenes answered our second question. Just by measuring the sun's shadow in two different cities, he calculated the circumference of the entire Earth. And you know what? His number was astonishingly accurate. So while all the Greek kingdoms are busy squabbling, a new power is rising in the West, Rome. These guys survived an invasion by Hannibal and his war elephants, they went on to conquer the Greeks, and they transformed their republic into a sprawling empire under their very first emperor, Augustus. They were setting the stage for centuries of Roman rule. But you know, even the mighty power of Rome couldn't last forever. As that classical world started to fade, the next 1,000 years or so would be shaped by two new incredibly powerful forces, ideas that would capture the hearts of millions, and horsemen who would just sweep across entire continents. Yeah, all across the world, powerful new belief systems started popping up. In the Roman Empire, Christianity, a religion born in some obscure province, paradoxically got stronger with every single attempt to stamp it out. Way further east, the Prophet Muhammad united the tribes of Arabia under Islam, which sparked this incredible wave of expansion that created a whole new empire. And over in India, the Emperor Ashoka, totally horrified by the brutality of his own conquests, embraced Buddhism and used his immense power to spread its message of peace. Back in Europe, the Western Roman Empire was, well, it was getting weak. It was being pressured by the Huns from the east, so all these Germanic tribes started pouring across the borders. One group in particular, the Vandals, actually sacked Rome itself. And this quote, which is attributed to them, just captures the moment perfectly. They weren't just migrating, they were there to conquer and, pick up some souvenirs. And this brings us to our final and most shocking question. Who killed more people than Hitler? The answer? Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. Erupting from the steppes of Central Asia, their conquest created the largest single land empire in human history. I mean, to put it into perspective, they conquered twice as much land as Alexander the Great, and then they doubled that. The scale of it and the brutality, it was just unprecedented. That Mongol storm did eventually fade, but wow, it had reshaped the world. Now, new connections were being made, not by land anymore, but by sea. Ships were about to link continents, trade was going to create unimaginable wealth, and dangerous new ideas about freedom and revolution were starting to challenge the power of kings. And yeah, these new ideas, they led to revolution. And here's a perfect little piece of historical irony for you. Britain fights this really costly world war against France, and they need money. Their solution? Tax the American colonists. The result? The American Revolution. Okay, now fast forward just a few years. France is now in debt from, wait for it, helping the Americans win that war. Their solution? Tax their own people. The result? The French Revolution. Same problem, totally different countries, same exact outcome. All right, now we're entering the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution is roaring in Europe, and it creates this massive hunger for resources and new markets. This leads to one final, frantic phase of empire building, with one continent in particular squarely in its sights, Africa. So how did they justify this new wave of colonization? With a really twisted version of science. They took Darwin's brand new theory of evolution and warped it into something they called social Darwinism. The argument was simple and super self-serving. Europeans were the fittest, and therefore they had a scientific right, even a duty, to rule over everybody else. But that whole justification was built on just deliberately ignoring reality. Africa was not some dark continent just waiting to be discovered. It was a continent of empires. For centuries, it had been home to these powerful, wealthy, and sophisticated states, from ancient Kush and Axum in the east to the huge trading empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai in the west, and the powerful kingdoms of Great Zimbabwe and the Zulus in the south. The list goes on and on. As the 19th century came to a close, the world was shrinking, and fast. The telegraph meant a message could cross the entire globe in just minutes. Airplanes were literally just on the horizon. But these new connections also brought new dangers. Advanced battleships, submarines, it all meant that the next war would be fought on a scale nobody had ever imagined before. And that's where we're going to pause our story for now. The stage is set for the 20th century. You've got these massive global empires armed with terrifying new technologies, all competing for resources on a planet that suddenly feels really, really small. The pressure is just immense. So the final question is pretty simple. What happens next?